about it. You know, when you say natural selection, what is the scientific definition of that?
Well, I don't know what the scientific definition is, but my definition is that...
No. Sorry. The scientific definition should actually direct you as to whether the truth of a contention is valid.
Okay, well, the way I understand it, I understand the scientific definition, I'll say it that way instead, is that an animal or an organism, or a living organism that is more suited to, say, an environment than another organism would be. They are more likely to survive, pass on the genetic information, reproduce themselves, and those that aren't able to survive, over time, will diminish in number and eventually possibly go extinct. That's the best way to put it.
Right, I can agree with that, and it sounds reasonable. However, if you take those two animals, if both of them have the same genetic fit, how do you determine which one is weaker?
The same genetic fit?
Yes.
There's an element of chance in it. I'm not saying that.
All right, okay.
Because, you know,
Absolutely. If there is an element of chance, then we are using evidence that is not definitive.
No, it is definitive. I'll tell you why. It's because we're talking over thousands of generations.
No. That certainly didn't sound like...
We're talking over thousands of generations of animals.
Sorry.
The effects of chance are very...
Sorry, brother, I'm Shabir. You are?
Jay.
Yeah. Well, I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is going back to the source point, As an example, are you familiar with Drosophila melanogaster?
No, I'm not.
Fruit flies.
Fruit flies, yeah.
Yes. Now, they were interfered with.
I heard about this.
Yes. Now, do you know this mutational element you were talking about? Well, that is what was done with them. Because they reproduced very, very quickly, it was easy. It was easy to do that. But they did that, and you had so many flies that were born with all sorts of deformities. What the researchers then did was they left the fruit flies to their own devices. And after a few generations, they were back to normal fruit flies. Now, the question therefore arises is, when we talk about mutations being beneficial, where do we draw the line or the distinction between a mutation being beneficial and a mutation being destructive?
Okay, this is a really good example because a lot of people mention this, and I spoke with the other gentleman here before he left.
Sure.
He was saying the same thing. He's saying, well, you know,
if we can restrict it to the fruit flies.
The fruit fly is in a controlled environment, and if you're inducing mutations within that fruit fly, then you don't know the consequences of that mutation. Just like genetic engineering. For example, if you look at, say, BT corn.
No. Sorry, brother. Jay, the consequences of the mutations are not the issue. The issue is that experimental elements were involved, which is correct, but they were to determine whether mutations in the real world actually occurred. So what they did, they, as you rightly put it, artificially or interfered with the natural mechanism. The definition of natural we haven't actually, we are just going to take as an accepted
That's why
fact.
I would say that it disqualifies that study from the natural process of mutation, because it's induced from an external...
Excellent. Well, if that is the case, on what definitive basis are you establishing that it was the mutational element that caused all the changes?
Because you can see you assume through things like organisms like bacteria or viruses that, say, with bacteria, for example, they've grown a resistance to some antibiotics that we have.
But those
are very, very, very
absolutely,
and they've changed in terms of the genetic.
I can agree with that.
One mutation, that's an example. Human beings. For
is it a mutation though?
It is a mutation.
How do we know that?
Because it's not a natural occurrence. It's been induced through the introduction of antibiotics.
Now wait a minute.
And they.
If the vehicle has the necessary arsenal within it, within the program, is it a mutation?
But it's not within it already. Because to say that's within it, it's to presume that the bacteria knew that Fleming was going to create antibiotics and then it's going to be...
Not at all. If, for example, you have got genetic switches, you take a multitude of elements, as soon as they come in, the switch automatically switches. Now, you see, the problem here is this, that we are talking on a speculative basis.
What you mentioned is epigenetics. It's a completely different
but there you are. But having said that, you take it a bit further, the control tests were being made to establish the validity of the suggestion that it was beneficial mutations. However, if you take it a bit further from the discussion that you are having, the brother was trying to point out a change from species to species, You on the other end was saying, wait a minute, you can't do that. The changes are so minute and over such a long period of time that you won't see these, you know, major differences between the species. I assume that is what you are saying. In a human
lifetime, yes.
Yes.
Lifetime you cannot.
Okay. Now, the problem then arises this. You know, when you talked about Homo erectus, yeah, these are hominids, okay, and as you said, they are bipedal, which is fine. But the evidence that we are assessing is leading us to a particular conclusion based on our interpretational element. Is that not correct?
Based on the interpretational element?
Yes. How we, for example, let's take one classic example that we are using today. How do we know that a particular hominid is closer to Homo sapien? What was the determining factor?
Determining factor of that?
Yes, to determine whether this is closer to the pungids, that's the ape world, or to the hominids, or the human Homo sapien.
The characteristics, through the bone structure, through the skeletal structure.
But the bone structure has to have a definite model already to measure against.
The model is Homo sapiens, us, because we're trying to figure out what we do.
There we are. So the one previous to the Homo sapien, how did we determine whether this one is a direct descendant?
I'm not sure how they determined that, but
so on what
the characteristics, that's the main thing.
I see.
I work off the character. I don't know the specifics.
Right, I see.
But I ask people to use the rationality and look at the characteristics.
But I am using the rationality, and I'm asking, if we are not aware of the details within what we are viewing, how can we formulate a reasoned conclusion?
Because you don't need to know the specific details all the time.
Excellent.
Sometimes you can look at something and say, well, I can see a similarity there.
Okay, let me ask you this, brother. I understand. Sahelanthropus cadensis. Are you familiar with that?
Nope. The Greek term. What's the
right. Okay. Let's do it this way. This is a particular fossil which the paleontologists suggest is the closest relative to the Homo sapien.
Okay.
Why? Because the apes in general, yes, the area where the backbone goes in and the spinal cord, okay, is slightly curved, okay, in the apes. But in the human beings, it is straight, yes? The foramen magnum. Now, I'm not just using these and bringing them up. It is to show that, look, if you are not familiar with the details, you are going to misinterpret the big picture completely.
Sure,
so
happens, yeah.
now it can happen. Now, not only that, I'm just using that as an example, yes? So you have cadences, but that is based on a skull. And the paleontologists will tell you, look, we cannot definitively say that this is to be used as an example. In order to do that, we need the knee bones, because the knee bones will give us an idea of their bipedality, okay? So the problem, right, that is fair, isn't it? Now, if you go back to that little mouse you were talking about, I think it was the Plesiadapis, yeah?
Yeah.
In South America, is that the one you were talking about at the start?
Sorry, say that again. What was it?
The little rat you talked about.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Is it the one in the South American jungles?
Perhaps, yeah, I don't know.
What do you mean perhaps you don't know? So what were you basing all your information on?
Because I was giving the example of
all right, I see. Sorry, Jay. Right, yeah. Right, I see. Yeah, but what I would suggest, brother, you see, the devil is in the details, pardon the pun, okay?
Yes, sir.
But if you look at the details, they will definitely give you a different picture. Now, I'm familiar with the subject matter, and one of the things that comes across is this. Number one, we use words to convey a particular meaning. The word science, what does it mean?
No, actually.
Now there you are, there's a start for you, Jay. Yeah? The word actually means knowledge. Yeah? Now, if it means knowledge, okay, should you look at knowledge as a whole to determine a particular method of interpretation, or should you restrict it simply because the majority of the people have decided this is all we will restrict the word to?
Also, that's what science is so good, because it means that you look for your own mistakes. That's the
but
whole
science
you hypothesize something, and people try to break the hypothesis.
Now look at this, Jay. You have just taken the classic route, despite me having just told you that the word science actually means knowledge.
Yeah.
Now, if it means knowledge, should you exclude knowledge of any kind?
No, look,
you shouldn't.
The scientific method
That's
is
different.
Science.
Exactly,
The
but can you see? Now, I agree with you, Jay.
Whether the word means knowledge or not,
yeah.
the scientific method is used to deduce our
I agree, but you will notice that every time you are having the conversation, you use the word science only. not the scientific method. What does that show? It shows a particular mindset. I don't mean it in a, you see, if it was semantics, yes, and it didn't have a consequence to the thinking of the individual, then I agree with you. Yes, okay. But that is not the, that is not the case. You see, and
you understood what I was saying when I was mentioning something.
Maybe, but I can't speak on his behalf. However, Jay, as you rightly pointed out, you see, you look at the details. Yeah, as you said, you won't look at the details, but I would suggest you do exactly that, because it is the details that will determine whether the narrative that is being given out.
I'm not saying the narrative is 100%.
No, of course not, and I know you are not saying that.
The characteristics are what I say is important.
Exactly, but now
the things that are obvious
are
obvious sometimes. If you look at a monkey or look at some sort of ape or anything, you look at them, you can tell that there are some similarities between us and them. They've got the opposable thumb and these different things. There are similarities between us and them.
They are. However, as the brother was pointing out, yes, there is a relationship of the cucumber and the human being, as he was saying. There is.
But that's
okay.
However, that you have to look at scientifically.
Absolutely.
If you look at it visually, you can see that.
Absolutely.
Genetics isn't an exact science.
No, it isn't. It is.
So to say that because we're related to the cucumber, we're the same.
No, of course not. No. However, you see, the difference here is this. If you look at the analogous bones they talk about, okay, we are told that we were fish at one time. Yes. Why? Because there's a tiny little bone somewhere in there that looks pretty much like our bone. 1 + 1 is 2. No problem. Okay. But is that definitive evidence? On a scientific basis, yes. Is that definitive? It isn't.
In terms of what? Sorry, that idea that
in determining that this is the conclusion definitively.
No,
it isn't. No. I'm looking at.
That's why I was mentioning to the gentleman that you have to look at things in their entirety.
Now this, Jay, you're absolutely right, but that is exactly what I'm asking you to do. That look at the evidence in its entirety in the details. You see, for example, I will tell you. For 30 years, there was a missing link that was announced worldwide. Have you heard of Piltdown Man?
Piltdown Man.
Piltdown Man. Have you heard of it? Piltdown Man.
Maybe I have. I don't know the name.
This was supposed to be a transitional fossil between the apes and the humans. Yes. For 35 years, scientists all over the world accepted it.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
Piltdown Man.
Of course,
But then it turned out to be a forgery. Now, in all honesty, Jay, what kind of scientific analysis was undertaken for 35 years to determine whether it was a fake or not?
It's a shame.
No, it may be a shame. However, it does show one thing though, that we are all prejudiced. We have proclivities. All of us do. Absolutely. Now, this is where, exactly. Now, what I would suggest, Jay, I mean, any kind of information to me is valuable information. Its value you will determine by looking at other things, as you rightly pointed out. But my suggestion would be, look at all the evidence. For example, you use the word natural selection, or the phrase rather. It isn't only about natural selection when you look at evolution.
That's why I was trying to tell him that.
I understand.
The species changes, how does that happen? That's why I always tell him you have to look at it in the entire context.
Absolutely.
It's about the mutation. It's about artificial selection.
Exactly. There is much. All these do. But that is on a general level, okay? Because when you come down to the details, if you are not familiar with the details, then one is going to wonder how you have formulated reasoned conclusion. So, like I was just discussing with you about all the examples I use. Now, one of the things...
Doesn't necessarily disprove evolution or just...
No, I wouldn't even say something like that. What I would say is, look, the crux of the matter is this, that, for example, Homo habilis, Australopithecus afarensis, what is the relationship between the two?
I'm not sure, but I know that they look the same, and I know they have similar DNA structures.
Excellent. So you know they look the same.
They are quite similar in terms of...
Brilliant. So you are suggesting to me that they had full skeletal evidence.
Not for all the different...
So how do you know they all look the same?
Because they have, for example, they might have the same tibia, similar shaped tibia, or they might have the similar skulls,
yes.
They're bipedal.
But you see, and you rightly pointed out, Jay, and this is a bit of an error as an elder, I would say to you. You know when you use that image, yes? Have you heard of Siva Pithecus?
Siva Pithecus?
Yes. No. You haven't. Okay. Ramapithecus. You haven't heard of all these? Okay. Well, these was allegedly, yes, fossils that had a relationship with Homo sapiens. Okay? And the drawings and the paintings are spectacular. You see them, you think, wow. It was all based on a small bone.
Okay.
How did they develop the whole picture of this particular relative of ours?
So if I saw that, I'd have said, well, that's probably an exaggeration because they have one bone.
It would only be an exaggeration if you went into the details to determine whether that was the case or not.
Yeah, sure, but the general
But that's what I'm
picture
trying
is
to
there.
say to you.
I mean, that's the exception that proves the rule. You
No,
know?
no, no, it isn't, because there are thousands of fossils that are attributed to the human lineage.
I know there are a lot of dinosaurs that they've got a couple of bones and they decided to make a whole dinosaur out of it.
Yeah, but you see, now where is the detail? It is when you look at the detail that's a different picture starts emerging. You know, Professor Coyne wrote a book, Evolution is True, Jerry Coyne. I don't know, have you read that?
No, I've read it.
Right, okay. Yeah, there are many books that have been written in which there is a particular emphasis on evolution being true. Then you have to, in all honesty, to dismiss something or to accept something, one has to assess the detail.
So the burden of proof.
Yeah? No, it's not about the burden of proof. That again is jumping the gun. Basically what I would mean by that is, look, if I say to you, Jay, I am your uncle.
Okay.
Would you doubt it?
Highly, yeah.
Why?
Because I don't know who you are. You don't look like me, so genetically I find it highly unlikely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So are we related to the fish?
Are we related to fish?
Yes.
In terms of our structure, yeah.
Genetics?
Genetically, yeah.
So am I your uncle?
No, but we're related as human beings, yeah.
But can you see?
No, no.
Technically,
that's a little trap.
no, not at all. No, my brother. No. It's just.
It's a trap. Come on,
No, it wasn't a trap. It's just to say.
We are genetically related. We're human beings, you know.
No, absolutely, brother.
Doesn't mean my uncle, though.
Yeah, no. But basically, what I mean by that is, look, how you view something can actually change in a split second depending on the kind of wording one applies. Yeah.
That's
now,
slight of your language, you know.
Yeah, that's why I exposed.
I
No, I didn't ask you questions.
No,
I was just
yeah.
carrying on with the discussion. That's all.
I want to ask, if not that, what else? That's the best question I have, because
excellent.
We have all of this evidence that we have accumulated over hundreds of years. If not that,
excellent.
What else do we have that tells us about us as human beings, about this planet, about the history of our race?
I have no problem at all. You see, the distinction I made earlier on.
One more thing. Sure, I can accept. You know, you can debate with me, and I can accept that there are mistakes here. No. There are incomplete fossils. There are all these different things that might jeopardize the integrity of an argument.
Yes.
Fine.
Yeah.
It's an argument. There's an argument.
Absolutely.
But you see, what else do we have?
No. Here is the difference.
And it's developing as well.
No, I agree. It is absolutely.
Changes. That's a BC.
I agree. You see, the difference here is this. Yeah. There is the evidence, and there is the interpretation of the evidence. My contention is with the interpretation of the evidence, not the evidence itself. Because as you have just rightly pointed out, the end game has not occurred yet. There are a huge amount of evidence to be unearthed as yet. Yes?
Sure, yeah.
So, it's at this current moment in time, it is the interpretation of the evidence that I am addressing. Yes. And that is why I'm constantly pointing to the details. Yeah? Sure. So, for example, Professor Coyne, one of the examples he uses, and especially Professor Richard Dawkins, he uses the example of this particular nerve, the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Right, okay, fine. He uses that as an example to show if there was a creator, he was pretty thick as far as they were concerned, okay? But you look at that example and you think to yourself, wait a minute, this is not being addressed the way it ought to be addressed. Yes? However, taking that a bit further, you know, when you were saying that, look, there isn't evidence for a creator, or no compelling evidence for a creator, whatever, yes?
I say there isn't evidence for or against. I say it's on the realm of science for that.
Right, now,
you can't use any evidence.
Now, there you are again. And you know what? You hit the nail on the head. You just said it is not the realm of
science.
And what does the word science mean?
It's on the realm of the scientific method instead of science. Because you say science is not
now, excellent. I'm so glad. It's not chicanery.
Yeah.
It is actually true, because when you use the scientific method, you are also going to tell me that it is not absolute.
The scientific method?
Yes.
As in it's not absolute in terms of its conclusions?
No, not only that, in terms of how it is formulated.
Of course, I'm sure there's things.
It's not, is it? So how? Now wait a minute. It is only the best because we aren't considering something better.
Of course not.
So shouldn't we be considering something better, possibly?
Well, please hypothesize.
But no. Here I'm telling you, it is very simple sometimes. Sure. Yes, the scientific method is merely a tool for you to establish certain things. Yeah, as we all know. Yeah, as we all know, that science, the way it is understood today, okay, looks at one thing. Can we look at the evidence? Can we assess it? Can it be falsified? Send it for peer review and all the usual, yeah? However, that cannot be applied to evolution per se.
I agree, because it's not something observable.
And now, exactly, but that means it is outside the realm of the scientific method.
Sure.
And if that is the case, should we equally dismiss it like we dismiss God because it's not within the realm of the scientific method?
Evidence, that's the thing. There's physical evidence.
There you are. You see, science doesn't only, the way we understand science, doesn't only rely on physical evidence, does it?
No.
Yeah, it doesn't. But as Professor Dawkins said, it is information that is gleaned and all the evidence is assessed and the best inference is drawn.
Yeah.
What does the word inference mean?
Inference, something that you say based on something else like evidence or...
Exactly. And there's a possibility that tomorrow some new piece of evidence will come along and this will be overturned. So,
I would say that's the thing, with big theories like evolution, which have been kind of proved in terms of how, say, bacteria that have very, very short life cycles, or like mosquitoes or other animals, you can verifiably show mutations and changes in an organism.
Well, actually, have you got any definitive evidence for that?
Yeah, I can give you artificial selection.
Well, artificial selection is not what you just said about bacteria. Okay. However, you are right. What I would say, absolutely. But my suggestion would be on this: should we not possibly also consider controlled evolution?
Controlled by? Sure.
Not controlled by. I just said controlled evolution. Isn't there a possibility? It doesn't. Why? Now look at this. We are looking at observable evidence, aren't we?
Yeah.
Although we know that the theory itself doesn't have that kind of evidence. It is the best inference that has been drawn from the available evidence.
Sure. Yeah.
That's what it is, okay? I don't have a problem with that. What I'm saying is, look, you said, is there an alternative? I'm saying, is there a possibility of controlled evolution? Now, what does the word control mean? It means different things to different people. Okay,
humans,
there you
animals,
are. You see, it can be
by other extraterrestrials, by
extraterrestrial, by a being that is not seen. There is a possibility. If we can think of the idea, we can posit it, we can dismiss it, but it should be dismissed on a rational footing. As we have just found, we can say one thing about a particular subject matter, but when we assess it a bit deeper, we suddenly realize it's pretty much the same as the other one that we are dismissing. So on what justifiable basis are we dismissing it?
Because the idea that someone else is controlling it, that we can't see, that we can't hear, that we can't speak, isn't in the realm of science, because you cannot know more.
Are you using the word science again?
Yeah, knowledge.
You mean the scientific method?
No, science.
Right. If you use excellent. That's good. Yeah.
You see, science means knowledge.
Absolutely.
And because something like an omnipotent God, especially in the Islamic tradition, you cannot know God. So he's not in the realm of science.
Now,
so there's no point.
No, not at all.
Because you can't know about it.
Well, that can't be true, can it? Because
I'm using the same.
Absolutely, it can't be true.
You can't learn about God. You can't know about God.
How do you know that?
Because you said unknowable, unseeable, powerful.
Did I use any of those words?
You said unseeable.
Did I use any of these words? No, I didn't.
God. You said unseeable God.
I didn't. I didn't. I said
unseeable being.
No, yes. I said a being that cannot be seen.
Yes,
okay, but you added the rest.
Okay, an unseeable being.
No. Then you came with omnipotent. Look, here is the point though. If knowledge leads you to a particular conclusion, should you not assess the knowledge?
Okay.
I was.
Jay.
And you come here.
Jay.
You always stay as you are.
Yeah, brother. Yeah?
It's the life you lead, another creed you profess, man. It's the life you lead, another creed you profess. It's the life you lead, another creed you profess.
Anyway, Jay, very quickly, yeah? You see, if there is knowledge about this being, then logic dictates that we should try and obtain that information. Yes, I know. I need to fly as well. I've got a 5-hour drive. Yeah? You need to access that information to see whether there is any validity in that information. Yes? If what we do, and unfortunately the majority of the people do, if you outrightly dismiss something, you will never learn properly. Because it will take you 20, 30, 40 years before you realize, wait a minute, I should have done that. Yeah? Now, I have no problem. Like I said, we were discussing evolution. I went into a bit of detail. Yes, it's a vast subject matter. Okay, and we can be here for a long time. But I know that if I am going to discuss a matter, then it is only fair and proper that I familiarize myself with that information so that we can discuss it appropriately. Now, unfortunately, the majority of atheists, agnostics, or people who can't be bothered, sort of thing, yes, the moment the issue of a creator is mentioned, they all go funny in the head.
I'll tell you my beliefs are.
You've got 1 minute. And then I'm going.
I don't find, okay, I'll tell you what. I don't see how you can theoretically justify a personal God.
Jay.
Because that's what it means to be monotheistic or to be
Can
part
I
of
have
the
a card?
Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition.
Jay, I can tell you now, that's my card, that's me. Yes? I look more handsome than the writing here. It's his fault. But I can assure you, Jay, yes, if we have a conversation, yes, on the subject of on the subject matter of the creator, I can sincerely say to you that you will come to a rational conclusion there is a creator.
Sure, okay.
My email is there. Let's go for it.
If you're here next week, we can have the same conversation again.
Unfortunately, Jay, I come once every 4 weeks, 6 weeks, because we come from over 200 miles away. From Blackburn in Lancashire. That's near Manchester.
What are you doing here, man?
Did you just say, oh my God? Exactly.
Jay, do email him though. Do email him.
Yeah, please do, Jay. I mean this as a brother. Yeah.
Sure, man.
If there's anything,
shouted over me, anything like that.
No, absolutely. That's what it's all about. That's exactly. It was a pleasure. Please do forgive me if I have said anything untoward. Shabir. It's there. There. Yeah. It was a pleasure meeting. Do drop me an email. Sorry?
Juman is my full name. Juman.
Juman?
Yeah.
MashaAllah, what a nice name. What are you changing it to J for? You want to start jaywalking?
That's what happens. If there's people everywhere.
All right, I know.
So I can't hear you, so it helps. You know?
No. Excellent, brother. No, do drop me an email. I love talking to people like you, seriously. Yeah? Drop us an email. And I am prepared to answer any question you throw at me. Even which girl you need to marry. No problem.
Do one thing, you know on the subject matter, put your name on there so he knows it's you.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Because he gets a lot of emails, so if you tell him it's you, he'll look at it.
Yeah, excellent, Juman. Look after yourself, my brother, yeah? Look after yourself. Absolutely, likewise. And you too, bye-bye. 5 o'clock.